Um, how many of you were here last week? Oh, okay. Online? Oh, yeah, yeah. Okay. So, um, you're looking at this idea of mindfulness and emotions. And last week I sort of took you on a bit of a crash course about where you can go with this if you're doing the training in mindfulness and understanding emotions and the importance of it. And I actually just heard a researcher, Cortland Dahl, which is a name I recommend looking into. I heard him interviewed yesterday, and he was saying that in the work that he's been doing, there are people who respond to being just taught meditation straight away. And then there are people who don't, which is my experience too, actually, talking to people. There are people, even if they're interested in meditation, they don't like doing it, or they're never going to get around to it. It happens, it's okay. And what he's found, I found this really sort of interesting because he said some people really respond to some kind of class, some kind of like, we call it psychoeducation here in psychology. So like some sort of information about, the mind or mental states or so on. It was interesting because in the study that, one of the studies that we did as part of my PhD, we gave people an 8-week intervention, like part of this cultivating emotional balance program. I pared it down to 8 90-minute classes. And we had different groups. And so one group, there's an emotions component and a mindfulness component. That there's more in that, that's all we used. And so one group, for the first 4 weeks, all they got was the emotions component. We explained some of what you'll see tonight: emotions, what they're for, how they work, why they get you into trouble. We went through 4 emotions. We looked at anger, we looked at sadness, we looked at fear, and also enjoyable emotions, and we gave them this content. And then after that, we just gave them this, and also should add, we gave them tools to help them become more lucid and understanding of their own emotions. These little journals and things they could fill in. And then we gave them 4 weeks of mindfulness training. There was another group got the reverse, right? We just gave them 4 weeks of mindfulness training and didn't talk about emotions, right? And then they got 4 weeks of the emotions training. And another group alternated. They got a week of mindfulness, a week of emotions like this. And we expected that the group 1, the one that got the emotions psychoeducation, we call it. It's just fun to say, right? The group that got the emotions training first, we figured that they would do slightly worse in everything. We thought it would help, but they didn't. They did as good or better. In fact, in some regards, they did better than the group that started with 4 weeks of mindfulness training and did this. So, and I know I'm unloading this onto you, but keep in mind, this first group, they only did half the mindfulness training, right? So the second group, they got 4 weeks of mindfulness training, then 4 weeks of education, but they meditated for 8 weeks, right? Because they kept meditating for the second 4. The first group didn't. They just we explained how emotions work, how to look at them, how to think, how to improve them. We got people to come up with their own plans. Hey, what sort of emotions do you struggle with? What sort of situations do you struggle with? Write them down. How do you think you would handle it better? Write it down. So these people came up with plans. And of course, if you ask them for that first 4 weeks, the contingency plans, the alternate responses that they decided they would be more helpful, more constructive, they weren't very good at actually doing. Why? Because they're emotional. I mean, come with the best plan in the world. If once I get emotional, I go back and do the same stuff I've always done, right? Then you give them the mindfulness, the 4 weeks of mindfulness. That's what it's for in this case. It's what it's for. The whole purpose of it is so that you gain lucidity, like you gain conscious awareness of your own mental and physical state, which is especially important in emotions because emotions have evolved to happen to us without us knowing, right? That's what emotions are for. So they suddenly set off this whole, chain of reaction that may even save our lives, which is automatic response. So we were kind of interested. In fact, even in terms of anxiety, because we measure a lot of stuff, we don't need to go into it. But in terms of anxiety, interestingly, the group who started with mindfulness training and then got emotions training did not significantly change in anxiety measures, actually, at all. Whereas the other group did. They significantly reduced. The group as a whole reduced. And for those of you who have statistics, you're thinking the groups were fairly small. They're only 15 people. So this is not quite enough there's not quite enough power for the stats to be convincing. It is enough power for someone to go and do this again with more people. So to come back to the point is there are some people who just respond to maybe getting some understanding first. I was like that, I got interested in meditation for sure, but if no one had explained to me what it is and why it should work and what measures I should see, what should I look for to see if it's working? If people hadn't explained this to me, I think I don't know if I would have carried through. It's hard to say, right? So I'm sort of mindful of that, really careful of that when I have a lot of people who I haven't met before, because I don't know which, if you're in a group that would prefer to have some stuff explained to you first, or if you're in a group, and I have this all the time, people just show up. I just have this sense I should learn to meditate. So I'm here. Oh, okay. All sorts of people, nurses, psychologists, tradies, all sorts of people come to my classes like that. I just have this sense I should meditate. I'm like, okay, cool, sit down, shut up. And so with that in mind, I try to find this kind of balance to give some information, but also get us meditating. So what I'd like to do then is just maybe sort of cover a lot of ground very quickly last week. So I'd like to just go back over some important stuff and then drop into some short meditation sessions. Also, it says up there, I'll put this slide up right at the end too. If you want some extra content like guided meditations and other actual scholars and people talking about this stuff, that's what that code is for. You'll just trigger an email that gets sent to you with some extra content, and I will send another email after tonight because I've got some more stuff I'd like to put on. Okay, I'll remind you again. So here we are. Oh, okay. That's supposed to drip feed, but it doesn't matter. Last week I said, so look, sorry, I'll just shut that. Emotions have actually evolved to be really helpful. Hunter-gatherers, they're great, right? If you're a hunter-gatherer society, emotions work really well. And they, as I mentioned last time, they control our central nervous system, they control our responses. And if we say, my example was, rustle in the grass, you might remember. And if you hear something in the grass and it sets off the stress response, if it turns out to be nothing, then it's okay. You go back to baseline quite quickly. If it's not, if it's danger, your facial expression, your tone of voice changes and alerts other people there's danger. And so if you look here are some of the things that think about a resolution, emotion as a resolution of short-term issue with what we call an automatized, so like an American habitual behavior. And so for example, fear will escape threat. That's the trigger thing, is some kind of sense of threat, either emotional or physical. It can be either. Sadness will elicit support. See people grieving or people who've lost something. It tends to elicit support in general, right? Anger will fend off an aggressive, neighbor or someone else. Contempt can avoid conflict. It's quite interesting. Contempt, one of the most interesting of them actually. Contempt can avoid conflict while still letting people know that they suck, whether that there's a problem. I used to use it and so what you probably don't know is in the CEB, in this big training, we do a lot of work on facial expressions. And so, I've done training to sort of recognize people's emotions, facial expressions quite quickly. Which you've got to be warned if you're going to do that. You can't turn it off. So you decide beforehand if you want to know what people are, how emotional they are or not. Anyway, contempt is interesting because I was at the time I came back from India and I was like 38 or something. And I was at Sydney Uni. I went back to do this psychology and Sanskrit degree. And the fourth level of the Fisher Library at Sydney Uni is silent, right? And it's a really nice place to work. I used to do a lot of work there. But of course, there's also people half my age who also came to work, but they weren't as quiet as you might have hoped. So I would try it out, right? Try it because I've learned all this stuff about emotions and I have the facial expressions down. So you try it. If you glare at people, right? If you give them some anger, you just get anger back. Anger is an anger trigger. If you look sad, they just get confused. Contempt works without fail, right? Just give them a flash of contempt, which is the only asymmetrical facial expression, by the way. And it looks a bit like this. You just do that, and the purpose of this emotion, people see it, and it's like it's a sense, contempt gives a sense that someone in some way is superior to the other. It can be sort of ethically, it can be physically. In this case, ethically, right? Someone pushes in line in front of you somewhere, flash them some contempt. See what happens. They just shut these kids up like every time. It's so interesting. There'd be people talking, just get the eye contact, just like that. And they go, oh, they know they shouldn't be doing it. So these emotions are quite, the reason I tell this is because the emotions have functions. We actually know quite a lot about emotions. There's not very mysterious, nothing very mysterious about emotions. We know what they're for, how they work, and so on. So it's what we have here, and things like, so we've got fear, sadness, anger, and contempt. Enjoyable emotions will actually bring us together and cement social bonds. These are all quite important, Which is to say then that in any of this, that trying to get rid of emotions or be unemotional is not, it would be a bad idea even if it were possible. Because actually they work. The trouble is they become imbalanced and they cause us problems. Excessive sort of interpretations of threat. So that is to say, experiencing frequent and high intensity fear episodes, leads to anxiety, same for sadness, and there's others. Okay, so as my point essentially is this, we know quite a lot about them. However, because they happen to us without us knowing, they're problematic, right? So you can say and do quite a lot under the influence of an emotion before you know you're emotional, right? And that often leads to what Paul Ekman, who's a sort of famous emotions researcher, calls regrettable emotional episodes. Yeah. Is there anyone out there thinking, I wonder what a regrettable emotional episode is? Anyone wondering? No? Sometimes people wonder, okay, you know what I mean then. So the purpose of what we're looking at is trying to reduce and even eliminate regrettable emotional episodes. If you're Buddhist, of course, we can talk a lot more about going a lot further, but that's what we're looking at. Getting emotions working for us because they're adaptive. Emotions have evolved because if emotions were not adaptive, evolution would have edited them out over successive generations, and they haven't because we need them, right? Because they're useful. And in fact, understanding them and getting your reactions and understanding this under control is where you can start to talk about. Last week I said being in control of what you say and do when you're emotional is sort of the baselines. There's a first goal to work towards, and after that, right, after you're in control of what you say and do when you're emotional, then we can start to talk about using emotions to higher levels of well-being, just like athletes train to get fit and healthy, the right diet, the right exercise, the right training, to be physically really healthy. Same you can do mentally, right? What we call genuine happiness or eudaimonia. Okay. So here's just so you know, here's what I'm going to do. I'm just going to dump a bit of information on you, and then we're going to drop into a meditation session. Okay. This is a crash course in emotions. Here's how it works. You have what we call an automatic appraisal system. We all have it. It's running 24/7. And what it's doing is it's scanning your environment for what we call triggers. Or actually, we call them elicitors, but triggers is better, right? There's debate, triggers learned, are they innate? It doesn't really matter. Most of them are learned, right? So, that's what it says. You're scanning the environment for triggers. These triggers exist in 6 domains of experience. That is to say, they can be anything you see, hear, smell, taste, touch, or anything you remember or worry about in the future or think about, or mental imagery or random rubbish that bounces around in your mind, right? Okay, 6 domains. See, hear, smell, taste, touch, the mental domain as well. Okay. I should add that the mental domain is a bit different. You can really gain a lot of control anyway. We'll do that in the coming 4 weeks because I'll just come back to that. Because that mental domain and how you get emotionally triggered in that domain, mentally, is basically the key element of the PhD that is dragging out, taking forever. They've almost finished. That we'll talk about in that 4-week series that's coming up, because there's some brilliant research on it. It's super clever. Okay, Automatic appraisal system detects a trigger, sets off an emotional experience, things like heart rate, tone of voice. You're in fear, the blood will come to your legs, so you can run. In anger, it comes to your arm, so you can fight. This sort of stuff really happens, there's a refractory period we'll come to. And that emotional experience gives rise to our behavior, which is anything we say or do, or controversially for some people think, right? But certainly what, and you've heard me say this already, the first goal of working in this way is to achieve control over what you say and do while you're emotional, right? It's not to get rid of the emotions, right? So it's still being really emotional. I still really want to, throw something at someone, but I say something clever instead, something constructive instead, or perhaps I just shut up, which is also impressive, if you're really angry, right? So be in control. Then, of course, once you gain control of that, we can start to talk about mental behavior, but you can't start there, right? You can't suppress emotional triggers. In fact, it makes it worse. So it looks like this, a little timeline. We have what's called a pre-episode, something, yeah, that will do. We have what's called a pre-episode. Oh, this will be fun, yeah. Pre-episode, so have I had lunch? Have I had a coffee? Is it hot? Is the air conditioner broken? Whatever. Is my child sick? Am I late for it? There's all sorts of things that feed into this, and that determines a lot about how strongly we appraise a trigger. So that determines the intensity of the emotional response. Then there's the actual experience I mentioned, blood pressure, tone of voice, and so on, which leads to behavior. And it's worth knowing that all of this, from the appraisal all the way through to, I should finish. Then, of course, you're in the post-episode, which is nothing more than the pre-episode of your next emotional episode. And so all of this can happen to you without you knowing. Is that all right? Sometimes people object to this. But you can be emotional, say, do all sorts of stuff without really knowing you did it. Is that okay? No objections. I'm quite fond of objections, in case you're wondering, so don't be afraid. Okay, and then we have to move this. There is this refractory period, and a refractory period is essentially, it's a time in which you will only, process information that supports the emotion you're experiencing. Yeah, I'll just leave it. Or you'll reinterpret information so as to support the emotion. So there's a lot of variance in this. Even the same emotional trigger will do it differently for you at different times. But there is a time in which it's quite possible, under more intense emotions, that no matter what people say or do to you, you'll interpret in a way to support the emotion. Okay. My example of that is, if you come across someone deep in an anger refractory period and you shower them in rose petals, you'll only piss them off, right? So that's worth knowing. Is why sometimes just shutting up is the most compassionate and best thing to do when someone's emotional. Right. Okay. And then of course, just to come back to this idea, this whole thing can happen to us. And that is to say, the reason that this behavior is unconscious, the reason this behavior is automatized, is because we've done it so many times, repeated it so many times in the past, that it just becomes what we call a first order response. You can do without thinking. A lot of times it doesn't matter, it's fine, But automatized behavior is everywhere. Some of you come here regularly, you can drive here and not really know you did it. No worries. If something happened along the way, it'd be fine. But you can drive here, you know the way, or your way to work or whatever. In fact, driving's a fun one to talk about because it's a good example of, if you're learning to drive, you have to think about everything you do. Your attention's all caught up in the mechanics of driving. Pretty soon you're familiar with it and you can listen to podcasts and have conversations with the person next to you, because the driving's automatized. It frees up cognitive resources you can use constructively. You can also use them in pointless things like listening to commercial radio, but you can use it for something constructive, right? So what that means is if I have a particular response, if I have some emotional situation that keeps happening with my neighbor or my coworker or a family member or my dog or the weather, it doesn't matter. If I have some emotional response that I think is problematic and I'd like to change it, it's a bit hard because the habitual reaction is so well greased. Yeah. It's really hard to stop that head that off at the pass, we say, in order to enact. Say, let's say I've got here's how I normally respond. I don't like it. I'd like to try responding like this, right? It's hard because this happens so quickly. I got a really easy example to show you with this, but it does require a volunteer from the audience. Anyone? Go on. Yes, thank you. You can say right there, everyone will do it quietly to themselves. I'm just going to ask you to do this out loud, right? That's all. What's your name?
Brigida.
Rakia?
Brigida.
Oh, Brigida. Okay. It's a fairly simple task, actually, so don't worry. I would just like you to tell me the color of each of these words. Okay, how about these ones? How about the color of the words?
Red, blue, purple, yellow.
All right, everyone got it? Because you're all doing this. It's just Brigida's doing it in front of a bunch of people she's never met. Okay, so I'm going to put the real thing up. All I'd like you to do is go left to right, top to bottom, just saying out loud the color of each word. Okay? Here they are. Where you go. No, Brigida, out loud. No, everyone else is.
Green, red, purple, blue. Yeah, blue, red, green, yellow. Red, green, yellow, purple, yellow, blue, purple, green, purple, green, yellow, green, red, purple, red, blue, green.
Thank you. Yes, that is impressive. So what's going on here, right? What's happening is this. As you saw when we put it up first time, your first order response to words is to read them. You don't have to think about it. You can't actually stop it. You just read them straight away. Right? This is not an innate behavior, right? This is learned behavior, because if I put this up in Tibetan, for example, you don't read the words, right? You probably don't know the letters, most of you, I'm assuming. Or even if it's in Spanish or French. So it's learned behavior, and you've just done it so many times it happens without thinking. This is the same response. You know, when I come across an emotional trigger, I have a behavior, and if I've come across this trigger regularly over years, then I will start to respond the same way. And in order to, what you'll notice is, and I should just double check for the sake of a control. Brigitte, would you mind just reading the first 4 lines? Just read the words.
Red, blue,
You get the idea. Brigitte can read fine, right? Right. And so what happened here, and super clever research into this, it's quite old, but very clever. What we know now is that if you have a well-greased kind of first order habitual response, automatized response, and you want to do something else, in order to do a second order response, you first have to inhibit the first order. You actually have to stop that and then do the other thing, which is quite hard. Yeah. And the more pressure you're under, the harder it gets. But if you think about the pre-episode, if you skip lunch or breakfast, or the air conditioner is not working, or your son's sick, or whatever, right? It gets harder and harder. And you'll notice that because what happens, and literally every time, I don't know how many times I've done this to people, you might think that as you go through it, you know, you sort of speed up as you get used to it. But people don't, they slow down, which Brigitte did too. It's because actually your pressure starts building, because in front of all these people, you're doing this thing that you've discovered is quite hard, right? And you get more and more stressed about it. Like you get more concerned, so you actually slow down. You don't familiarize more. Yeah, because the extra stress, we call it a cognitive load, right? The extra stress and pressure that's going on makes it harder and harder and harder to inhibit that first order response and enact the second. So if I have a habitual response with someone who I see every day or have seen many, 5 days a week, or however often for however long, and I want to change that, you have to know it's going to be hard. And if you just decide to change it, your chances are pretty slim, actually. Right. You can double down on it. You can keep going with this. Well, I'll say that. But enough to say that if you're under a lot of extra stress, this gets very hard to do something you haven't done before. Yeah. So when we come back to this idea of like an emotional timeline, then and in this pre-episode in particular, if you are going to try to pull something off, you're going to try to, that you haven't done before, you have to know that it's going to be difficult. You have to inhibit the first order response in order to do this, right? Because under the influence of emotions, it's very hard, it's almost impossible to innovate. You almost always do something, say something that you said or done before. Certainly thought before. Changing what you think when you're emotional is possible, of course, but that takes a bit of extra work. How's that? That make sense? Okay, yeah. Sure, some of you have heard it before, of course.
Corey, I've got a little
All right,
question.
how do we do it? Overcoming automatic responding. Well, that's what mindfulness is for. Mindfulness, remember, essentially means, mindfulness in Sanskrit and Pali and Tibetan languages, it translates very neatly as just remember. That's what mindfulness means. It does not mean non-judgmentally eat sultanas and all this other stuff. It just means remember, right? Yeah, all this other non-judgmental moment-to-moment awareness, that's 50 years old. That's new stuff, right? And that's fine, right? But what we're going to do here is just learn some Buddhist approaches to mindfulness. And so there are three ways in which, in fact, of course, you can cultivate, work on mindfulness in all sorts of ways, but we're going to do it in some formal meditation sessions, which means you need a posture which is specific for meditation, right? And that develops relaxation. So I don't want to be the posture police, but I'm just going to temporarily do it. One way, and we've put some mats out at the back, one way is to do it supine in what yoga calls a shavasana, which is a Sanskrit word that means corpse pose, which is pretty self-explanatory.
I love that.
Yeah, and this is good because, and often Westerners often with their hips, it's nice to put something under your knees if you can. So you've got this, we call it supine, right? If you're in a chair, ideally, last week when I was asking you to meditate, I was saying push your hips as far back as you can, because you want to be able to have this in your, supporting your spine, right, in here. Often it's helpful if you have a thin cushion or something to put in there, so that your back is actually quite straight, but you're leaning, it's supported, you're leaning right back into something, but it's supported. So you've got that, and then finally, of course, if you're sitting and you look like this, get up and sit on the chair, right? It's so funny. You do it, because I start Google searching and searching free, domain websites and stuff for some photos of people sitting properly. I can only find these photos. And none of these people are sitting in a very conducive meditation posture at all. Yeah, so bad for your back. Your hips have to be higher than your knees. Okay, it's a tripod, your two knees and your bum. That's where the weight is. Okay. This one almost makes me angry because there's cushions right there. But still they're sitting like this. And then this one I've seen used in all these like yoga retreat sort of ads.
But Corey, I think they're not taking pictures of meditators, they're taking pictures of pretty people.
Yeah, well, that's right. Yeah, that's right. That's right. It's only cynical people like me who get in the way. But yeah, if you're sitting like this, then get up and sit in a chair. You don't put your knees up like that. It's very hard to find people sitting properly. So she's not even on a cushion because, of course, the benefit of growing up in a culture where you probably sat on the floor, which I'm quite envious of. Yeah, here again, this is a really legit. There's all these mudras in yoga, but I'd ask for what we're about to do, whether you're sitting in a chair or not, just leave your hands flat down, right? Because why? Because what we're about to cultivate, it fundamentally relies on being absolutely relaxed. In fact, we talk about the body, the breath, the mind being in what we call their natural states, right? And that literally means any muscle, extra muscle, we don't want it. And the body just to be, it's like you're asleep, the body's asleep, but the mind's awake. Does that mean if you go to yoga class and they tell you to do this, that you should not do it? No. You do what the yoga teacher tells you. But, like right here, right now, I'd ask you to try this approach. When I go to yoga class, I do what I'm told, except for the meditation. I usually ignore them, but that's okay. I got other stuff to do. So please get comfortable. Your choice. Chair, cushion on the floor, mats on the back, in the back. I'll give you a few Second, if you're at home, of course, then get yourselves comfortable. One thing for the people at home, it's cool to be here, in person, of course. One advantage of doing classes by Zoom, I'll say though, is that you have an opportunity to make a meditation space in your home, right? And it's a big deal. Like the location where you do this is kind of important. So, for example, if you come here often and you meditate here often, then just coming here will settle you down before you even do the meditation, which is great. But of course, you don't want to just come here every time you want to meditate, and sometimes the door's locked. So you need to be able to do it at home. So that's one advantage actually of doing it at home, to try to start to treat your house, at least a part of your house or your home, as a meditation space. So, okay. Having said all that, the first thing we do, firstly, is understand why we're doing this. And of course, there's all sorts of reasons, but let me just give you this. This is about gaining control of what you say and do while you're emotional, because it will reduce your risk of things like anxiety, depression, and so on. It will improve your relationships with others. It will help make others happier and more relaxed as well. There's all sorts of flow-on benefits. So with that in mind, we're going to just do a quick scan through the body and release tension that we don't need. Okay. Start between the eyebrows. Doesn't have to be perfect. Just work your way down through your cheeks, jaw, shoulders, even your throat, elbows and wrists, fingers. Hips and thighs, just releasing tension as you work down. Your calves, your ankles, your toes. And if in the course of the coming session you notice any of those muscles start to tense, it's great that you notice you just release them as best you can. And now you just allow your awareness into the body. Imagine, well, the classic analogy is like a fragrance filling a room. And you just allow it to land on or to illuminate those tactile, those physical sensations of breathing. Just anywhere you feel that it's easy. And at some point you will notice that you are distracted, or you will notice that you're becoming tense, or both. And actually it's good that you notice. Being distracted is just normal. Noticing you're distracted is a bit unusual. Doing something about it is quite extraordinary. So if you notice the mind's wandered off somewhere, that's okay, it's good. You just relax the body, release the distraction, and reset your attention. Relax, release, reset your attention on the sensations of the body moving as you breathe. From time to time, just very intentionally check in on yourself. Okay. So you're trying to just attend to the sensations of the breath. That's your object. That's what you're focusing on. To support you in that, you need to be relaxed. So from time to time, just scan through the body and see if you're getting tense. And if you are, just make an adjustment, just release a little bit. From time to time, check your own mind, right? Hey, am I distracted? Am I on target or what? If you need to make an adjustment, you just make an adjustment. You remember, don't wait for me to remind you, just occasionally do a quick check. If there's tension, you release it. If you're distracted, that's okay. Relax. Reset. If you do notice you're distracted, that's great. Check the body, see if you're tense as well. Make adjustment if you need to, vice versa. If you notice you're tense somewhere in the body, check your mind as well. You're becoming distracted. These two are often related. If you notice anything out of balance, you just relax, release, and reset. Resting in a sense of uninterrupted flow of attention on the sensations of the breath as best you can. So from time to time, you're just checking in on the body. Is it really just resting in its natural state? No unnecessary tension. It's just as best you can. It will never be perfect. Same with your attention. Is it just resting on your chosen object, or has it been carried off? Either way is okay, as long as you know and you know what to do. And the breath itself, ideally, this is deceptively hard. The breath just flows in its natural rhythm without you controlling it at all. We talk about the body being resting in its natural state, your awareness resting in its natural state, and your breath just flowing in its natural state. Finally, to support you in this, if you find it helpful, and when the body does breathe out just naturally on its own, just incrementally, just a little bit, relax the body. Release the mental chatter in the background. Just a little. Every time you exhale, you just relax and release. And every time the breath turns and comes back in, maintain your relaxation, but maybe just sharpen your focus just incrementally, just a little, on the sensations of the breath. This breaks down the whole thing to a breath by breath sort of affair. Relax, release as the body exhales naturally. Stay relaxed, but sharpen your focus just a little as the breath comes back in. All the while, as best you can, resting in stillness, attending to the motion of the body moving as you breathe. without really changing anything, just hold to mind whatever understanding you have about the benefit of what you're doing. At least making mindful, making emotions lucid, make yourself aware of them. Change your responses to be constructive. Maybe have some aspiration for the practices you do. If not, I'll give you one, which is to be in control of what you say and do when you're emotional, without getting caught up in how well you think the session did or didn't go. Just rest in some contentment of the effort you've put into achieving it. Taking control of your emotional life, taking control of your relationships, improving your focus, the list goes on. Okay. So those of you lying down, just take your time. I'm just going to start talking at you. I'm just looking at no, I can't hear. The speaker's off down here. Should I turn it back on? Will everyone hear everything that happens? Yes, it's true. I haven't heard you say anything, Mickey, because it was muted, which I probably did on purpose. Anyway. Okay. So just a little bit, and then here's just some kind of important bits. And then if you have any questions about what just happened, I'm really happy to talk about it. Here, in Sanskrit and Tibetan and Pali, to a lesser degree Chinese and Mandarin, I don't know any Mandarin, but I do have a degree in Sanskrit and speak Tibetan. Meditation in these sort of source languages, it translates very nicely as habituate or familiarize, or a word I really like is cultivate. Yeah, right. So of course, I hear them say, I'm translating not very often these days, hardly ever. I hear the Lama say, Komba, the word is in Tibetan, and I just say meditate. Actually, that's not true. No, that's not true. I try to say cultivate if I can. But still, when you're translating, it's okay. But that's really what it means. What sort of things do you cultivate? Kindness, empathy, compassion, insight, for example. That's also meditation sessions, to be clear. If you're sitting down to meditate and someone comes in and says, what are you cultivating? You have to be able to answer. Right? If you can't answer, what are you doing? This is if you're like I'm just gonna have a little beef on a lot of the modern mindfulness movement from time to time, because I think they need it. Because that's they have to be able to answer. What are you doing? Meditation is like training, It's like if you go to the pool or you go to the gym or you go running, if someone asks you what are you doing, you know what you're doing. You're training in cardio or weights or this, that, or you can say, what are the benefits? Oh, I'll be stronger, I'll be fitter, less risk of heart disease, whatever. You can answer all these things, right? And then someone just comes in, you meditate and says, what are you doing? You go, I don't understand. It's training, So unless, of course, you're using meditation for escapism, just sort of 15 minutes of escaping from my otherwise unsatisfactory life or something, which is fine, but you don't need to come here and do that because YouTube's full of that stuff. So you need to be able to answer what are cultivating. Well, in this case, you would primarily say mindfulness, cultivating mindfulness. You could also say relaxation, right? Mindfulness. So what is mindfulness again in these languages? It just means remember or bear in mind what sort of things, your focal object. So in this case, the sensations of the breath, but also, in the outside of a meditation session, my bigger, longer term goals, and so on. And there's always this dynamic in what we're doing here. If you're talking about mindfulness and emotions, there's this dynamic. Really, if you want to get the most out of this, you really need to have this idea that I might have long-term goals, I want to have better relationships with let's say everyone, but family, friends, neighbors, whoever. Maybe I want to relate better to my own worries and concerns and my own mental activity, which is really interesting. Maybe these are my longer term goals. The thing, and once I'm emotional, right? The goal of an emotion is a short term solution to this thing that's right here in front of me. It's often in conflict with my longer term goals. Is that all right? Like, it's not, that's controversial. Please speak up. You know, it's often in conflict. It can sort of get in the way of my longer term goals. So in actual fact, what you'll find, mindfulness training, in order to remember things better, what it means is in the sort of the flow of your everyday life, right? In the midst of an emotional reaction, you can keep in mind, you can remember your longer term goals. So now, rather than have my behavior driven by every little, you know, shiny thing and sharp thing and annoying thing that happens in the course of my 21st century life, right? Rather than just automatically responding to all of that, as you know, all those emotions are arising, my behavior and things I say and do is being driven by my longer term goals, which is maybe to be more relaxed, it's maybe to be kinder, be more compassionate, you know, whatever they might be, right? And they drive my behavior. That's what it's for. And that's the stakes we're talking about here, right? This is why, you know, mindfulness is not non-judgmental moment-to-moment awareness if you're serious about it, right? Because it's about exercising good judgment when, well, all the time, but especially when you're emotional. That's the whole point. The whole point of mindfulness for thousands of years has been to help you exercise good judgment. You know, so if people start talking about it being non-judgmental, it's not totally crazy, but it's not very helpful. What it means is just setting the bar super low. You know, it's like I'm just gonna be non-judgmental as these people. Sorry, I almost got political. I don't know you well enough. So this is where we're at, right? You've got mindfulness, it's your ability to bear things in mind, to remember. In the midst of a session, meditation session, you get a focal object, which I'm thinking, oh, it comes next. Yeah, which I gave you, which is the sensations of the breath. So here's a definition, because I've gone on and bagged the popularized version of mindfulness definitions. So here's a definition taken from I think a 5th century scholar from India called Asanga in a text called Here is Levels, Shravakiyam. Non-forgetfulness of the mind in regards to a familiar object having the function of non-distraction. Forgetting things is the same as being distracted in this way of thinking. So like I have a problematic relationship with somebody, say my neighbor. This is the joke. I mean, I make this example. I've been doing it. It's my best example. So I just keep repeating it. It's great when I have new people because I can just rehash this old material. If I have let's say I don't like my neighbor, which is not the case, although it was recently, but then not since I moved. So let's say I don't like my neighbor, but I do want to borrow his lawnmower, right? So I have a long-term goal. I want his lawnmower, but I have a short-term problem that whenever I see him, I'm all sarcastic and snarky, right? Which is my well-greased habitual response, right? So now, if I want his lawnmower, I need to keep the longer-term goal in mind when I meet him. So I need to say things that are not going to get in the way of getting my hands on his lawnmower, right? I'm just trying to come with like fairly low-stakes examples, right? So here we are, and so that's this idea of non-forgetfulness of the mind. And if I do see him, let's say, yeah, I don't know, I'm late for work or something's going on, and I run into him, and then I accidentally say something snarky and sarcastic, right? Why did I do that? Well, because I forgot, right? You can see my short-term goal jumped up and bit me on the ass, basically. You know, it jumped up, and I forgot my long-term goal, right? That's what happened. Maybe you can apply this example to other situations in your lives, maybe of higher stakes than an imaginary lawnmower, you know. But that's really non-forgetfulness of the mind. In order to do that, mindfulness does the heavy lifting. You place it somewhere, you know. But the only way you're going to know if you're distracted or not is what we call introspection, which is a meta-awareness. You know? You need to know if you're distracted. Yeah. So that's why I ask you to, and this is not just me making it up. This comes from thousands of years of peer-reviewed practice. So your mindfulness, so you attend to the sensations of the body moving as you breathe. And then you need to know if something's going wrong. So you need to very deliberately, intentionally check. Am I distracted? No, it's fine. Am I tense? no, yes, whatever. It doesn't matter if you're distracted or if you're tense. It only matters that you notice and adjust. And these two things are related very closely. You'll tend to tense up in different places for everyone. You'll tend to tense up as you get distracted. You will tend to become distracted as you get tense. So if you're starting to really pay attention to this, you're going to get these things, you're going to notice these things. And you're going to notice these parallels. And the thing about that is, of course, it helps your meditation. Because maybe you notice your shoulder or your neck or your lips or your eyebrows or something. You start to notice that gets tense as you're distracted. So it's a kind of warning signal or a cue to do something, to intervene. But you get this information, it's available to you once you get up and go outside as well. And it's the same parts of your body that are getting tense when you're getting emotional. So this is super, super important information when you're using interest. So we say in this tradition, you are training in two things. You never just train in mindfulness, never. You train in mindfulness and introspection, always, without exception. Mindfulness and introspection. Mindfulness places the attention. Introspection is this repeated investigation of body and mind. And of course, the last bit of sort of terminology you need for this is just focal object, right? So the focal object for now, sensations of the body moving just wherever. There's lots of focal objects you can use, but that's just what we're using. So here's the terminology you sort of need to get through this. Okay. Questions, outbursts, objections? I've turned this sound up, I think, in case there's any Zoom land objections.
Can you hear me okay there, Corey?
Yes, I can. I'm just turning it up more.
Oh, okay. So I did have one question about that refractory period. What if while you're still kind of on tilt, some other thing comes along and triggers you, so you never get to recover?
Yeah, so if it's true, so the question is, if you're in a refractory period, I mentioned this, it just supports the emotion you're experiencing. What if something else comes along? The thing that comes along, to change that emotion will have to be really way more intense than the thing that sets you off. So you're in a refractory period, and so for the most part, all the information you're getting, you're just going to use it to support the emotion you're experiencing. But it is possible that someone gets in with something more intense or more salient, more relevant to you, which is good to know, because it might mean if you're dealing with another person in a refractory period, for the most part, you kind of just have to stay relaxed and around them until they sort of settle. But if you know them well enough, you might know there are things you can actually get in there that will sort of short circuit it for them. Ideally, in a good way. Of course, you can short circuit it and things get worse. So, yeah. But if it's someone you know, yeah, you can. Is that all right?
So far, so good.
Oops. Yeah, we'll come. Is there anyone? Yes, this is the last bit that I wanted to show you that I can turn the slides off. So I'm going to give you a different version, like of the emotional timeline, sort of a more kind of a real life example, if you like, in a fear response. So let's say I'm afraid of you. I have these triggers, right? Maybe I'm afraid of dogs, spiders, public speaking. So, and remember, I said last week, what emotions should be for, like if we're using them properly, emotions are supposed to be signposts that something we think important is happening. That's what they're for. So let's say I'm afraid of dogs. And I see a dog. Keep in mind, it might be a tree that like a small shrub I think is a dog, right? I might hear a dog. I might just remember a dog. There might not be a dog at all. I just need to think there is one, right? So bang, detect a trigger. So autonomic nervous system. So now there's automatic reaction, blood pressure, body temperature, facial expression, tone of voice, all these things, right? That leads to behavior. The behavior will be in a higher, intenser emotion. It'll be automatic. It'll be unconscious. It'll almost certainly be behavior I've done in the past, right? Because I said this already. You don't really innovate when you're emotional. And there'll be an outcome, which will be positive, negative, neutral, almost certainly an outcome you've experienced previously, okay? There's an important aspect of this missing, which we'll just put in now, and that's this attention capture. I talked about this a lot last week. Once your attention's captured, taken away from you, not under your control, that sets off the automaticity. That sets off the lack of conscious awareness, okay? So let's just insert that. And here's what you get. You encounter a trigger, your attention's sort of captured, so you're operating on this exogenous attention system. That sets off all this emotional stuff. Your behavior is automatic and unconscious, and you end up with the same outcome that you've got in the past. Is this all right? Yeah? Okay. So if at some point we interrupt this sequence, right? How would we do that? Well, just by controlling your attention. That's the whole cause. You know, so last week you got all this talk about anxiety and depression symptomology, but really what's driving that is emotions. So why don't we play out here? What's driving emotions? What's driving emotions is your attention. Why don't we play in that space instead, right? So you can short circuit this whole thing by pulling your attention back, because if you are not paying attention to a trigger, then that trigger can't set you off. For the moment, as William James said in 1890, what you attend to is reality. Yeah. So imagine this thing's happening. There's a dog. I think there's a dog. My attention's captured. I notice it's captured, so I pull my attention back. Why would I be able to do that? Why? Because I've trained to do it on the cushion, right? I've been doing it every day for however long. You just did it for 15 minutes. Attention capture. Oh, yeah, okay, I pull it back under my control. It's captured again. I need it under my control. You know, so you get used to bringing it back all the time. Why would you do that? Well, this is why, right? So in the outside world, because your whole emotional life depends on captured attention. If you're used to what it's like to have your controlled attention pulled away, you get this visceral, this very clear understanding of the difference between what it's like to have my attention under my control and what it's like to have it captured, right? When you understand that and you're really familiar with them, then you get that for free everywhere you go, right? And this attentional capture, that's the root of all your emotions. So if you've been doing it here in a little test tube, you know, laboratory of a meditation cushion, you know, then you get it for free everywhere else. And so here you go. What would you do? Well, you pull your attention back. Now that I'm no longer, let's say I just bring it back to the breath, you know, the sensations of the body or something. Now I'm no longer attending to the fear trigger. So the fear is going to dissipate anyway. I don't have to do anything, right? Because I've pulled my attention back. Realistically, you're probably going to do it here. Even more realistically, probably here. And even more realistically, it doesn't fit on the screen. But, you know, ideally, over time, what happens is the better you get at your meditation mindfulness practice, the earlier you catch your distractions, right? The earlier you catch your distractions here on the cushion, the earlier you will catch your emotions in the outside world. You just get it for free. You have to do it. That's the stakes here. So, you know, I like to use perfect world scenarios. Imagine this: you encounter a trigger, your attention's captured, you pull it back, right, under your control. Now you have choice over your behavior. And if you have come up with a plan earlier, oh, next time this happens, I'm going to do X instead of Y, right? Then your percentages are much better. You're much more likely to pull that off. So your attention's controlled, behavior's controlled, and then presumably you get your desired outcome. The extra cool thing about this, if you think back to the colored words on the screen, right? Learned automatized behaviors. If having your attention noticing your attention's captured, relaxing, and bringing it under your control can be an automated response. Oh, my attention's captured. You can automate this, right? And then what happens here is that bottom kind of freak, you know, unusual episode, well, it becomes your automatic behavior response. It becomes. And now your desired outcome is actually just habitual response. You don't have to sort of worry about it anymore. You can actually, it's called extinguishing. You never quite get rid of this response in psychology, or that's the way of thinking about it. But still, you can have your primary response be constructive.
That'd be amazing.
It sounds amazing, isn't it? And to be clear, that's the entry level. That's the lowest bar. That's attainable.
Start.
Yeah.
Then.
Yeah, well, from there you can go. Well, you can use that to go a long way. And I just add one last part of this. I would encourage you then, if you think about what's going on here, if I go back to this part, when you're sitting on this probably sounds familiar to most, if not all of you, sitting here, let's just say you're trying to attend to the sensations of the body moving as you breathe, right? You're doing that, and then your attention's pulled away, and you notice, you know, and you don't really know what's happened. And then you're sort of thinking about planning, writing a shopping list, you know, planning revenge on your neighbor or whatever it is you're doing, you know, and then you notice that, oh shit, you know, and you pull your attention back. right? That may have happened to some of you in the last 15 minutes or so, right? Well, that's essentially the mechanics, that cognitive mechanism of being pulled away, pulled back, pulled away, pulled back. This is your emotions. Emotions are essentially distractions, just distraction, right? That's all it is. And if you sit if you spend 15, and in fact, Amishi Jha, who's a wonderful researcher from the US, who wrote a book called, I forget, it's worth reading. I'll put it in the stuff. I really like her work. I've used a lot of her work. She's decided 12 minutes a day is enough for her, which is funny. Anecdotally, I've always said 15 from what I've seen. I always try to get people to do 15 minutes a day. Yep. And if you do 15 minutes a day for 2 weeks, you should notice some difference for sure. Yeah. And that's what you've got. So now emotions really are signposts, right? It's like, oh, I'm emotional. And now what do I do now? Well, if you've thought about it beforehand, you'll have a plan, hopefully. Yeah. You know, it's a lot of, it's kind of funny. There's quite a lot of talking and it's a lot of blah, blah, blah to get across a fairly simple concept, actually. Right? We have two types of attention, essentially for our purposes. You know, this is an oversimplification. Two types of attention, controlled and captured. Yeah. Your job is to, in the beginning, become familiar with the difference between them, right? Why would you do that? Because then when your attention's captured and you notice it, you notice that your attention is captured, you can pull it back. What it will do really is it'll give you this lucidity, this kind of conscious awareness of what's going on for you emotionally, right? Because when your attention's pulled away and captured, you don't always want to do something about it, actually. You know, like I said, have to oversimplify a little bit because that'll lead to emotions, for sure it can. But when we look at the mind wandering literature, there's actually two types of mind wandering. We talk about it's called spontaneous and deliberate, which is unfortunately, I would call it lucid and non-lucid if I could. In fact, I've made a push for that in the paper we're publishing now, because that's the difference showing. And if you're non-lucid, has all these correlations with anxiety, depression, all sorts of psychopathologies, right? And emotions. Whereas lucid mind wandering has more association with things like creativity, for example, and these sort of adaptive outcomes, you know. And I can tell you again from my own research and some others a little bit, but mostly it's a bit of what I've been working on. What you'll find is mindfulness training alters people's trait levels. If you're more likely to be in this non-lucid, spontaneous type of mind wandering, mindfulness training will actually shift that trait over to the more adaptive type. You don't have to do it yourself. Mindfulness will do it. Same with worry and rumination as well. You know, or what, for the sake of 15 minutes a day, basically, you know. I mean, more is better, of course. In fact, while on that, actually, are there any outbursts or questions? They don't have to be outbursts. They can be, you know, quite relaxed.
I had one in regards to Asanga's definition of mindfulness.
Mhm.
Is it possible to maintain mindfulness of your focal point, but also allow, you know, thoughts come and go, but I can still maintain awareness of my breath? Because I noticed, but maybe it's not 100% like sharp focus, but it's still in the background. And sometimes, you know, I notice like that wisp of the thought, but I don't pay attention to it. But it's still there. I'm able to kind of sit. Is that?
Yeah, of course. You know, background awareness. There's so in terms, you're talking in a meditation session.
Yeah.
In a meditation session, of course, right? So I've got a focal object, but I know there's cars going by. I'll know if someone coughs, but it won't disturb me. I'll know that this breath was longer than the last one or shorter than the last one. I'll know that, right? Because I can't help because I'm just aware. That's what awareness does. But it's background awareness. Yeah.
And that would still be mindfulness.
Yeah, well, it's of course your mind. What happens is you've got this mindfulness. In the coming 4 weeks, I'm going to bring in this brilliant paper written by some scientists and Buddhists together, and they talk about some aspects of meditation training in this super clever way. But one of the things they talk about is background awareness. They're like, well, there's all this background awareness that you're aware of these things, but it doesn't matter. But if something becomes salient, and the reason it might become kind of like we say like relevant, There's all sorts of reasons it might happen, you know. Then introspection is going to notice it, and then I make an adjustment. But until it sort of pops up and interferes with what you're doing, you just leave it alone. Yeah, just leave it alone. And you just start, because the same way emotional triggers exist in 6 domains, see, hear, smell, taste, touch, and the mental domain, your distractions in a meditation are the same, right? Cars going by, things you smell, maybe some pain in your legs, whatever it might be, right? See, hear, smell, taste, touch, and then there's a mental domain of distraction. And all those things, you treat them the same. Yeah, cars going by, wondering if, you know, should I buy milk on the way home, whatever, you know, like for an auditory domain, and then in the mental domain and so on. Yeah, no, of course, you'll be aware of it, you just don't care. But of course, what will happen is like, it'll be, yeah, did I do the cookie thing last week? Probably, maybe not. If I can be sitting here meditating, and just have this, you know, I'm focusing, let's say, on the sensations of the breath, the thought, I would like a cookie, right? Just randomly appears in my mind and bounces around and just drifts off, right? It has no influence. Is that okay? Does that make sense? Yes? That can happen, happens to me, okay? But not necessarily. The thought might also pop up, right? And here's the thing, and I've actively avoided it today, but I just can't, I always go here. The way you treat that mental activity is the issue. And so if that mental activity appears, if the thought, I would like a cookie, appears in my mind, it has no, but it can't do anything. All mental activity, all thoughts, all memories, everything that goes on in your mind is inert, 100% harmless, without exception, right? There is no mental activity that can harm anyone, ever. However, right? What does cause a problem is a particular mechanism in the mind we call reification, or cognitive fusion, which means, and here's, again, like the lawnmower, this is just a nice banal example. So I'm sitting here meditating, the thought, I would like a cookie, pops up in my mind. And if I treat that, right, as just random mental activity in my mind, it's powerless, right? Is that okay? Yeah. If I treat it as a fact, now I treat it as actually a genuine, effective, accurate representation of reality, which is not, but I can treat it like that. Now I have this fact delivered to me from the universe. You would like a cookie, right? Now I have a subjective desire for a cookie. So interesting. Why? Because the thought arose? No, because I treated the thought as a fact. Reification, it's called. The implications of this, however far implications of this you're seeing now, if you're hearing this for the first time, I guarantee you haven't scratched the surface of this. In fact, I'm making a push in the research we're doing that actually this mechanism underlies all pathology. Right. So it's a big deal. It's a very big deal. And it is one of the objectives of mindfulness practice, is what we call de-reification. Right? So having said that, am I saying there's no such thing as PTSD? Is there no such thing as worry? Is that no, of course not. These things are real and they depend upon particular cognitive mechanisms. And I'm in very safe company, like research, like scientific company, when I say the evidence is really strong. It's not the content of what we say cognition. So it's like, it's not the content of your thoughts and mental activity is not the issue. It's your relationship with those thoughts, with that activity. That's the issue. And if we continue our habit of treating mental activity as being accurate reflections of reality or representations of reality, right? If we do that, then consistently, then sort of anxiety, depression, these sorts of things are a fairly logical and expected outcome. Yeah, for sure. No worries. Yeah, absolutely. Is cognitive fusion bad? No, we need it. We use it all the time. In the coming 4 weeks, we're going to go into this in a big way. For those of you who can cope with 4 weeks of me going on at you about this stuff. But we'll come back. We'll go into this in a big way. And it's one of my favorite topics because it's been around for thousands of years. This is not news, right? this idea of reification. It's been around for thousands of years. The implications of it have been known for thousands of years. Right? And as a heads up in Buddhism, reification of certain things is the fundamental cause of absolutely all suffering that any living being has ever experienced in the history of the universe. So it's fairly important in Buddhism. And so, but now there's this whole research push to kind of explore this more and more. There's been some really clever work that I want to talk about in the coming weeks that goes, and it's like this. You think about, some of you might have heard of like cognitive behavioral therapy, kind of the gold standard therapy for anxiety, depression, and a lot of things these days. And it basically targets your cognitions, if people have these worrisome ideas and so on, kind of targets the cognitions and tries to change that activity to something more healthy. Actually got quite a lot of, it's quite effective. Relapse rates are quite high, but it's still quite effective. There's another, and it's come by Adrian Wells is his name, and he first came up with this quite some time ago, 30 years ago, but it's been evolved ever since. In the last sort of maybe 10, 15 years, it's come a long way. He's developed what's called metacognitive therapy. Super interesting. He's decided that so just for the record, metacognitive, in reviews, metacognitive therapy is outperforming cognitive behavioral therapy in a big way in relapse rates and improvements. And what he does is this, and let's just treat this, if you will, as cross promotion for the coming weeks, because kind of what he's done is this. He said, actually, there are these metacognitive beliefs, he calls them, and the most important one. There are 5 different domains, but did I do this last week or not? No. The most important of them is what he calls negative beliefs about worry, or beliefs in the uncontrollability of thoughts and worry. Right?
Oh, that was my question as well. I had
Right.
that question as well. Like actually being worried about not being able to control your thoughts.
Yeah, this is type 2 worry, we call it. We'll go into this in the coming weeks. So in particular, you have there's different of these beliefs. One of them is this belief that your thoughts are uncontrollable and dangerous, right? And so people who believe that, then of course, then they start worrying about things, and of course they believe the worry, and bang, it's a very, very strong pathway. They did set it up for a general anxiety disorder, but it's been tested all over the place, and it's underlying. It's having improvements, like I say, post-traumatic stress disorder, obsessive compulsive disorder, depression, anxiety. So really good work. I was so impressed when I read this stuff, but it still doesn't quite explain, right? Why would mindfulness help? And there are 2 reasons that are related. One is, if you do some mindfulness training for a while, you will have a personal experience of having thoughts and ideas and memories coming at you and not causing problems. I would like a cookie, you know what I mean? It's like, yeah. So you have your own experience of it. So that metacognitive belief dies down. The other thing is the belief itself, it only causes problems is if it's reified. So the thought, my thoughts are dangerous, can pop up in my mind the same way I would like a cookie pop up in my mind. It's 100% harmless until I treat it as a representation of reality. And now away I go. It's super interesting, super clever work. I'm so impressed by them. So you've got these people, and they're trying to change things people worry about. And good, having some, of course, why not? It's the most obvious place to start. Some other people have come along and said, you know what, that's cool, but there's other stuff going on deeper that's more important, and they've had great success with it. And the work, it's not often I get to really be excited about psych research, but it's just brilliant. I love it. But then of course you turn around and you draw back in 2,500 years of peer-reviewed, contemplative ideas about how this works. Yeah, and we have some explanations there. And there's already people who are doing, like, putting this in scientific language and getting that conversation happening too, right? And so you're in this position, and which is sort of, I'm piggybacking on their work. And so you're in this situation where so Okay, can I go on a bit of a tangent and then just come back? Psychology, when you have, and you can sort of speak up if you have a background in this or you know, because you might know better than me, but here's my understanding. When you have a cluster of particular symptoms, so for example, would have been the same with COVID. In my lifetime, AIDS was sort of a really classic example. You got these people and they seem to be dying of the same thing, but we don't know why, right? Same clusters of symptoms. So what you have then, they call it autoimmune deficiency syndrome. What you have now is a syndrome. And the reason it's a syndrome is because there are clusters of symptoms and we don't know the cause, right? It's clearly something, but we don't know what it is. So we call it a syndrome. Then you find the HIV virus, and then you have a disease. Right? It's not, I mean, they still talk about it in this way, but that's how it works. You've got a syndrome because you don't know. When you discover the cause, now you have a disease. And when you have a disease, you can start developing treatments aimed at the cause because you know it's the virus. Yeah. So in, say, for example, the DSM, the Diagnostic Statistical Manual, that most American and most Australian psychologists would use, not all. It's pretty thick, I don't know how many there are, thousands of disorders. How many of those do you think have cures? How many of those do you think we know the cause of? Have a guess.
No.
No, there isn't one. Yeah, that's right. They're all syndromes. There are no mental diseases. Why? Because nobody knows the causes of even one of them. They're clusters of symptoms. Does that mean they're useless? No, no. Actually, we're having, I said last week, psychology is very sophisticated and quite effective symptom management, right? But that's all they can do because they don't claim to know the causes. And I might point out, this was pointed out to me by one of the lecturers in abnormal psychology at Sydney University. So who's a psychologist herself, right? So I mean, it's not like I'm sort of making this up. And so that's the situation we're in. And what we're talking, and so you say, well, okay, so we've targeted cognitions, we've targeted these things that you're worried about and tried to change them, had some effect. Of course, that's great. Someone's come along and said, oh, check this out. There are people believe things about the mental domain. They believe things about this, and that's the problem. Let's target this, have even better success. Very impressive, but they're not done yet. We're still not a cure. So and I'm not suggesting that de-reification is a cure for mental. No, I'm not suggesting that. But it's a hell of a lot closer than anything we've got so far. Right? That actually, when you started digging down here, you say, well, de-reification, or we say cognitive fusion, loosening up that fusion is going to have flow-on effects to the beliefs you have about the mental activity that's actually causing the problem, because the mechanism is down here. And there's one paper, it's called something, it's got this cool name like the phenomenological matrix of mindfulness-based practices from a neurocognitive perspective, or something fun like that. But it's really cool because they've taken this idea of de-reification, and their claim in a peer-reviewed paper is that it's the object of all traditional mindfulness training. It was one of the objects of all traditional mindfulness training, and that there are three, and it's a nice way to finish. And I'm sorry we didn't get, let's do another meditation, but then I went on this little rant. They put three, they call them orthogonal factors. What do they call them? Like 3 dimensions of mindfulness training, right, that exist across all genuine traditions, including the modern, hopefully. Meta-awareness is one. So you think back to the slide I had about introspection, that's what that is. You need to be aware of what your mind is doing. Okay. If you don't know you're distracted, correcting for distraction is, how do you do it? You can't. So meta-awareness, object orientation. So that's, of course, where do you place it? Do I place it on my on the sensations of the breath, or on the camera, or on the mouse? Where do I place object? It's called object orientation. And then the third factor is, they call it de-reification. We often call it cognitive fusion, but de-reification. These are these 3 fundamental factors of mindfulness training across the board. Yeah. There are secondary ones too, though. And it's so interesting because if you sit down and if you think about it like that, and And the mindfulness, 2 mindfulness sessions we've done last week and this week with me, and every mindfulness session you've done with me in the past, some of you. They're the 3 main things you're working on. Because as I'm sitting here, I got my attention focused on whatever, let's say it's sensations of the breath, you know. So there's the mind, there's the object orientation. You know, I've decided, I've put my attention under my control and I've decided where to put it. I'm going to put it in the body. It's cool. In order to keep it where I said I'd put it, right? In order to keep that mindfulness on target, I need this meta awareness. I need introspection, which I have to train enough to get good at. It takes some work. But I get good at it. Okay, that's pretty cool. So now I've got these 2 things going on. But of course, there's all these thoughts and ideas coming up. Yeah, and some of them are really interesting. Some of them are frightening. Some of them make me angry, you know, all these things. Why is that? Why actually the thoughts themselves, I understand to be harmless. You know? So now I need to actually treat the thoughts and ideas, treat all the mental activity for what it is, understand them, not as accurate representations of reality, but as just mental activity. It's my own subjective experience. Yeah. And so I loosen all that. So now I'm in this situation, and then these 3 things just start to work together because I placed my attention on something, right? So now everything else that comes at me and tries to distract me powers down a little bit, you know, because I've got this force of attention. And of course, if those things come at me, I have this introspection, meta-awareness, right? That alerts me to it. It's like, hey, this stuff's coming at you. No worries, you know, I can take care of this. How do I take care of it? Well, I know what they are, so I don't get involved. It's just random memories and worries about the future and all this stuff. It's not important right now. You know? And so I can do this, I just keep it up, you know. And so then in the outside world, I get, and then of course, every now and then something jumps up and, you know, it throws a hood over my head and drags me off in the boot of the car and kidnaps me, and, you know, it takes a while for me to come around. You know, that's okay. But what happens then in the outside world, what goes on over time is that the time in which I am unaware of a distraction gets shorter. Why? Because meta-awareness is monitoring the mindfulness, right? And the reification, these reified thoughts that are so powerful, are being powered down because now I know what they are. I'm calling their bluff, man. You know. So so now I have this situation where the amount of time that I'm unaware of my distraction gets less. My ability to pull it back from a distraction gets quite strong. So, it's distraction, no worries. I'm really familiar with controlled attention, you know, really familiar with what it's like to be on target, to be relaxed, to be in my natural state, to be breathing naturally, to be paying attention, right? So I'm really familiar with that. So then when these other things happen, I get pulled away. It's like this seismic kind of upending, you know, seismic sort of shift. Like, oh, you know where to pull it back. So as the time on the cushion, my non-lucid mind wandering, or my the time in which I'm unaware of being distracted gets shorter. Well, in the outside world, the amount of time where I'm emotional without knowing it, the amount of one emotional episode, the non-lucidity of that episode decreases. Why? Because emotions are distractions, right? I might have mentioned that. So I'm sitting here training and being lucid in my distractions and relaxing into them and pulling my attention back and taking control right here. And in the outside world, I start to note my emotional lucidity increases, the amount of time in which I am non-lucid decreases, right? So I start to get really good at it, to the point where, you know, you have what Paul Ekman calls impulse control, where sure, you can feel the impulse of an emotion, which is very helpful and very useful because I know something I think important is happening, right? But now rather than follow on with that, I just pull it and say, well, what's the most important, what's the best, most constructive way to operate from here? Yeah. And of course, up till now, maybe the best I can do is go, that's all right, I can relax. I can just rest in my natural state, write it out. Yeah, no worries. It's cool. But then, and so just to bring in some of what I spoke about last week, that's just this first way station, you know, like that's kind of this first step. Then when you start to bring in this sort of what we call eudaimonic happiness, or causes of genuine happiness, we talk about things like the 4 immeasurables, kindness, compassion, kindness, compassion, equanimity, and empathic joy, we call them. Now, not only do I pull my attention back and the emotions dissipate, right? But now I know what to do, right? Because I've trained in this. Okay? And now my habitual response is to notice when I'm distracted, pull my attention back, and go looking for the distress of the people around me. Why would I do that? Because I want to act compassionately. Can I act compassionately if I'm not focused on the stress? Well, of course not. Why? Because compassion is a wish to alleviate distress. Right? This is and so that's where you're at. That's where this whole piece just starts to fit together. So then you set up, you go from a feedback loop of poor attention skills. Why? Because I'm human and I live in the 21st century. That's why. Not because there's something wrong with me. That's why. Right? So poor attention skills. Poor attention skills make me emotional because, well, you know why, right? Emotionality, actually, uncontrolled emotionality degrades my attention skills. Stress, let's say, degrades my attention skills, which makes me more emotional. But where do you go, right? You know, pathway to pathology. And yes, a feedback loop, you know. And you can you interrupt the feedback loop? Yes, you already started tonight, you know. And if you interrupt the feedback loop and you know how these mechanics work and what to do, and you have kind of good instruction, not just, oh, you know, eat a sultana for 10 minutes or something like this. They have actual instruction, you know, on how to do it. Then you can start not just reverse the feedback loop, but set up a new feedback loop that when you notice your attention is captured, brings it back. Rather than degrading your attention, it increases your meta-awareness, which increases your ability, your introspection, which increases your ability to pull your object, your object orientation, you know, your focal object back, right? It decreases the power of these thoughts because they are de-reified. Then when your attention's under your control, then you add, because we haven't even really talked about it, then you have this sense of, well, how would I go forward to sort of increase how would I make these emotional reactions and things actually conducive to high levels of well-being and my own mental health? Well, that would be to focus on the people around me, you know. So of course now it's great because now I'm not focused on my own triggers, which are the things that's setting me off in the first place. Now I'm focusing on other people's, right? And wondering if there's something I can do, having the aspiration that there's something I can do. And that's easy. You start with people, it's easy, right? Friends, family, loved ones. And then you move to like people kind of, you know, like bus drivers and people at the supermarket or whatever, you know, just neutral people. And you move on to annoying people. You know, eventually you can get to prime ministers and presidents and stuff. So that was not supposed to be aimed at any particular prime minister. So that's it. And then, so I don't know how exciting that is for you or how interesting that sounds for you, because what you've done now, if you do this, and hopefully I'll roll this out in the coming weeks, is this: you can draw on 2,500 years of peer-reviewed experience and theory, right? You can match that up actually nowadays. It's such an amazing time to live in. You can match that up with some really clever scientific research, like really clever and really helpful. And you know, so if you don't want to get, you don't have to get too Buddhist about it. Scientific research, and then of course we can start to apply all that to how you can achieve really high levels of mental health and well-being, right? And it just, you know, it falls back into this fundamental thing, you know, if you do not get your attention under your control, you know, if you do not have some meta-awareness or introspection, so you know what's going on with your attention and what you're attending to, and if you're not aware of how you're attending to it, this is reification, know how you're attending to it, then just lower the bar, right? Lower the bar down to like the modern mindfulness level of, you know, 15, 20 minutes of escapism a day, which is probably quite helpful for some people. Lower the bar. If you want to set the bar high, you know, if you want to, then let's look at the people who for thousands of years have set it high and see what they were doing and if what they say makes sense. And if it stands up to scientific rigor. I can tell you I think it does. I can also tell you that I've gone 4 minutes over time, so I apologize. So yeah, come along for that if you'd like. No questions? Great. See you later.